I had been married to Sophia Reynolds, the youngest CEO of Reynolds International, for exactly 2 years. To the public, we were a perfect couple. Sophia was beautiful, wealthy, intelligent, and constantly surrounded by cameras. I was the quiet husband who appeared beside her at charity events, corporate dinners, and company celebrations. Whenever photographers asked us to smile, Sophia would take my arm. I would smile. The cameras would flash. Everyone would assume we were deeply in love. But the truth was written in a document locked inside our safe. Our marriage was a contract. 2 years earlier, Sophia needed a husband to protect her position as CEO. Her grandfather had threatened to remove her from Reynolds International unless she demonstrated stability in her personal life. He believed an unmarried CEO in her 20s would struggle to earn the confidence of investors. Sophia needed a husband. I needed financial support. My family's business was struggling, and without a major investment, we would have been forced to sell everything our family had spent decades building. So Sophia made me an offer. A marriage contract. 2 years. No emotional expectations. No interference in each other's private lives. No questions about relationships outside the contract. At the end of those 2 years, we would separate peacefully. I agreed because I believed I could handle it. I was wrong. At first, everything was easy. Sophia had her world. I had mine. We attended public events together, then returned home and lived almost completely separate lives. She worked late. I worked on rebuilding my family's company. We rarely argued because we rarely discussed anything personal. It was almost like being roommates who happened to wear wedding rings. Then something changed. I fell in love with her. I didn't plan it. It happened slowly. I noticed the small things first. The way Sophia removed her glasses when she was tired. The way she became unusually quiet before important meetings. The way she pretended not to care when criticism affected her. I began leaving coffee for her before early meetings. I started remembering which restaurant she liked. When she came home exhausted, I would wait until she finished talking before telling her about my own day. She never asked me to do those things. I simply wanted to. Sophia never noticed. Or perhaps she noticed and chose to ignore it. She was always busy. Breakfast became business calls. Dinner became meetings. Birthdays were forgotten. Anniversaries were treated like dates on a contract. I told myself that it didn't matter. After all, this was never supposed to be real. Then came the final month of our agreement. Sophia returned home one evening and placed a folder on the kitchen table. The contract expires in 30 days. I looked at her. I know. She sat across from me. After that, we should go our separate ways. Her voice was calm, professional, almost exactly the way she sounded when discussing a business transaction. I looked at the folder. That's fine. Sophia's expression changed slightly. She had expected hesitation. Maybe tears. Maybe another request for more time. Instead, I opened the folder. The termination papers were already prepared. I signed them. Sophia stared at my signature. You're not going to argue? No. Why? I closed the folder. Because I finally realized I was the only person still hoping this marriage would become real. She became silent. I stood and carried my coffee cup to the kitchen. That night, I moved into the guest room. The next morning, I started planning my departure. I had learned everything I needed to learn during our 2 years together. I knew how powerful Sophia was. I knew how demanding her world could be. And I knew that staying in a marriage where I was never chosen would eventually destroy my self-respect. 3 weeks later, I found a new apartment. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't surrounded by security guards or expensive cars. It was simply mine. I also accepted a business partnership that would allow me to rebuild my family's company independently. For the first time in 2 years, my future didn't depend on Sophia. I began packing quietly. Sophia noticed. One evening, she stood in the doorway of the guest room. You're really leaving? I continued folding a shirt. Yes. You've already arranged everything? Almost. She looked at the boxes. I didn't realize you had planned this so quickly. I smiled faintly. I've had 2 years to learn how to prepare. She didn't answer. The final night of our contract arrived faster than I expected. I placed my wedding ring beside the signed papers. Sophia entered the room. Her eyes immediately went to the ring. You're leaving tomorrow? Yes. You've already arranged everything? Yes. She looked strangely unsettled. I thought we'd have dinner. I glanced at her. What? Because it's our last night. I thought about that. Then I realized something. She wasn't grieving our marriage. She was uncomfortable with its ending. There was a difference. For 2 years, Sophia had known I would be there. She had never needed to wonder whether I would come home. She had never needed to ask whether I was waiting for her. Now that certainty was disappearing. I hope you have a good life, Sophia. She looked at me. You too. I picked up my suitcase. I walked toward the door. For a moment, I expected her to stop me. She didn't. I opened the front door. Then I heard her voice behind me. Daniel. I turned. She stood in the hallway. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "Thank you." I nodded. "Goodbye, Sophia." I walked out. The door closed behind me. I stood outside for several seconds, breathing the cold night air. I thought leaving would hurt. It did. But for the first time, the pain belonged to me. Not to a contract. Not to her decisions. Not to the hope that she might someday love me. I had spent 2 years trying to become important to someone who had never promised to choose me. Now I had stopped waiting. I looked at the apartment key in my hand. It wasn't much, but it belonged to my new life. I turned toward the street. Behind me was the house where I had been Sophia Reynolds' husband. Ahead of me was a future I had to build alone. And for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of it. I was finally free. The first week after I left, Sophia continued working as though nothing had changed. She attended meetings, signed contracts, appeared at corporate events, answered interviews. To everyone around her, our separation was simple. The marriage contract had reached its expiration date. Nothing more. Sophia told herself the same thing. It was only a contract. There had never been any promises beyond 2 years. So why did she keep looking at the empty chair beside her during dinner? Why did she notice that the house was suddenly quieter? Why did she reach for her phone whenever something interesting happened, only to stop because she no longer had a reason to call me? She tried to ignore it. She buried herself in work. That had always been her solution. If something made her uncomfortable, she worked harder. If something made her emotional, she scheduled another meeting. If something reminded her of me, she simply looked away. Then, one Monday morning, her assistant placed a business report on her desk. Your former husband's company has announced a new partnership. Sophia looked up. Daniels. Emily nodded. Sophia opened the report. The company that had been struggling before our marriage had secured 3 major clients. Its outstanding debts had been renegotiated. A new technology partnership had attracted several investors. Sophia stared at the numbers. She remembered how I had once told her that my family's company could recover if given enough time. She hadn't believed it. Or perhaps she had simply never cared enough to listen. How did he manage this so quickly? She asked. Emily smiled. Apparently, your ex-husband is good at business. Sophia frowned. Contract husband. Right. Sophia returned her attention to the report. But the words stayed in her mind. She had always assumed I needed her financial support. That was one of the reasons our agreement had made sense. She had money. I needed help. She had believed she was giving me security. Now she was beginning to realize something uncomfortable. Maybe I had never needed her as much as she thought. That evening, Sophia attended a corporate dinner. The room was filled with executives and investors. Someone congratulated her on the end of her marriage. I'm sure it's a relief, one executive joked. 2 years completed. No more complications. Sophia smiled politely. Yes. Then another guest asked, Are you planning to start dating again? Sophia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She thought about me. She remembered the small things. The coffee I used to prepare before her early meetings. The umbrella I always kept in the car because she hated getting caught in the rain. The notes I sometimes left on the kitchen counter. The way I waited for her when meetings ran late. None of those things had been part of the contract. She had simply never asked herself why I did them. That realization unsettled her. When Sophia returned home that night, the house felt enormous. She walked into the kitchen. Everything was exactly where it had always been. Except me. She opened the refrigerator without thinking. Inside was a small container of her favorite dessert. She stared at it. I had bought it several weeks earlier. She remembered the conversation. She had mentioned that dessert reminded her of childhood. She hadn't thought I was listening. I had. Sophia closed the refrigerator. For the first time, she wondered how many things about me she had failed to notice. The next morning, she called me. I answered after several rings. Hello. There was silence. Then Sophia said, How are you? Good. Your company is doing well. Yes. I'm glad. Thank you. Another silence followed. I waited. Finally, she asked, Are you settling into your new apartment? Yes. Is it comfortable? It is. She didn't know what to say next. Neither did I. Then she asked something unexpected. Do you ever miss this house? I looked around my apartment. There were still several boxes waiting to be unpacked. Sometimes. Sophia was quiet. What do you miss? I thought carefully before answering. The memories. She swallowed. Do you miss us? I didn't answer immediately. The question would have destroyed me a few months earlier. Now it simply made me thoughtful. Finally, I said, I miss what I thought we could have been. Sophia's voice became quieter. I understand. I wasn't sure she did, but I didn't argue. She asked, Do you regret marrying me? I looked at the wedding ring I had placed inside a drawer. No. That answer surprised her. Why not? Because it taught me something. What? That caring about someone doesn't mean you should keep waiting for them to choose you. She didn't respond. After a moment, she said, Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you. I know. Then why does it feel like you've completely moved on? I looked out the window. Because I had to. She breathed quietly into the phone. I didn't expect you to leave so easily. I almost laughed. It wasn't easy. Then why did you? Because staying would have been harder. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Sophia whispered, I think I miss you. I closed my eyes for a moment. I understand. That's all. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Neither do I. She ended the call shortly afterward. I placed my phone on the table. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I simply felt tired. For 2 years, I had hoped Sophia would one day look at me and see more than a name on a contract. Now she was beginning to notice my absence. But I had already learned something important. Being missed wasn't the same as being loved. And being wanted after leaving wasn't the same as being chosen while staying. Meanwhile, Sophia remained alone in the house we once shared. She stood beside the window and looked at the city. For the first time since signing our marriage contract, she wondered whether ending it had been the biggest mistake of her life. And for the first time, she understood that the man she had expected to remain available forever was actually learning how to live without her. Months passed. My company continued growing. We opened a new office downtown, hired dozens of employees, and secured several international clients. The business my family had nearly lost was finally becoming something I could be proud of. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my success against Sophia. I wasn't trying to prove that I could survive without her. I was simply building my own life. The media eventually noticed. Articles began describing me as a young entrepreneur who had rebuilt a struggling family business without depending on his former wife's wealth. I ignored most of them. Sophia didn't. She followed every announcement more closely than she admitted. Then came the International Business Conference. I had been invited to deliver a presentation about technology expansion and small business recovery. I stood backstage reviewing my notes when the event coordinator approached me. Mr. Reynolds, you're on in 5 minutes. I nodded. Thank you. I walked onto the stage. The lights came on. Hundreds of executives filled the room. I spoke about rebuilding, about making difficult decisions, about refusing to let past failures determine future opportunities. When I finished, the audience applauded. I stepped away from the microphone. Then I noticed someone standing near the back of the hall. Sophia. For several seconds, our eyes met. She looked different. Not physically, emotionally. There was no confidence in her expression, only realization. After the presentation, several executives approached me. They congratulated me. One investor offered a potential partnership. Another asked whether I would consider expanding into Europe. I thanked them both. Then I turned toward the entrance. Sophia was waiting. Daniel. Hello, Sophia. She smiled faintly. You've changed. I smiled. I had to. You look happy. I am. She lowered her eyes. I'm glad. There was an uncomfortable silence. Then she asked, Do you remember the first month of our marriage? Yes. You used to ask me to have dinner with you. I did. I always said I was busy. I remember. She looked at me. Why did you stop asking? I thought about the question. Because eventually I realized I was asking someone who didn't want to spend time with me. Her expression tightened. I never meant to make you feel unwanted. I know. You always accepted my excuses. That doesn't mean they didn't hurt. She looked away. For the first time, I think Sophia understood something she had never understood during our marriage. Silence wasn't the same as indifference. I had been quiet because I didn't want to pressure her. I had accepted her decisions because I loved her. But eventually, there came a point when acceptance became self-neglect. And I had reached that point. Sophia took a slow breath. I started counseling. I was surprised. Why? Because I needed to understand myself. She paused. I treated our marriage like a business agreement, even after I realized you were taking it seriously. I didn't interrupt. I thought keeping everything controlled would protect me. From what? From being vulnerable. Her eyes became wet. I was afraid that if I truly depended on you, I could eventually be hurt. I looked at her. So you kept me at a distance? Yes. She smiled sadly. And now I understand that I hurt you anyway. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes an apology didn't require an answer. A few weeks later, Sophia came to my office. She carried a thin folder. She placed it on my desk. I immediately recognized it. Our original marriage agreement. I kept a copy, she said. I looked at the document. I thought it would remind me that our marriage was never supposed to be real. And now, she looked down. Now it reminds me how wrong I was. I picked up the folder. For a moment, memories returned. The day we signed it. Our first dinner together. The first time I realized I was falling for her. All the nights, I waited for her to come home. All the mornings, I pretended not to be disappointed. Then I closed the folder. You don't need to rewrite the past. Sophia looked at me. What if I want to change the future? I smiled sadly. The future isn't something one person can decide. She nodded. I know. She didn't argue. She didn't ask me to come back. Instead, she sat quietly across from me. I loved you too late. The words were barely audible. I looked at her. Maybe that was the simplest truth between us. She hadn't been completely heartless. She had simply realized her feelings after I had already stopped waiting. I cared about you for a long time, I said. Her eyes filled with tears. I know, but caring isn't enough to rebuild everything. She nodded. I know that too. For once, Sophia didn't try to negotiate. There was no contract, no conditions, no promises. Just two people acknowledging that they had once mattered deeply to each other and had still managed to lose what they had. Before leaving, Sophia stood near the door. Do you hate me? No. Do you ever wish you had stayed? I thought carefully. I sometimes missed the person I was when I believed we had a future. She understood what I meant. But I don't want to become that person again. She nodded. Then I hope you find someone who chooses you completely. I smiled. I hope you do too. She walked out. I watched the door close behind her. There was sadness in my heart, but there was no anger. I had finally stopped asking why Sophia hadn't chosen me. The answer no longer mattered. What mattered was what I would choose next. That evening, I returned home and looked around my apartment. It wasn't as luxurious as Sophia's house, but everything inside belonged to me. The furniture, the business plans, the future. For the first time, I understood that freedom wasn't about leaving someone behind. It was about no longer needing someone else to determine your worth. Sophia had realized what she lost, but I had realized something even more important. I had found myself, and that was something I would never willingly lose again. A year after our contract ended, my life had become completely different. My company had grown into a respected technology business. We had expanded into new markets, hired talented employees, and established partnerships that I once thought were impossible. More importantly, I had stopped looking backward. Sophia and I rarely spoke. Our businesses remained separate. Our lives moved in different directions. I thought that was where our story would end. Then Sophia's company faced an unexpected crisis. Reynolds International had entered negotiations for a major acquisition. The deal looked promising at first. Then everything began falling apart. The target company suddenly changed its financial projections. Several investors became nervous. Two major shareholders threatened to withdraw their support. Sophia's board became divided. Some directors wanted her to accept an unfair offer simply to prevent the acquisition from collapsing completely. Others wanted her to fight. The situation became public. Financial analysts began questioning Sophia's leadership. I learned about the crisis through industry contacts. My company could have benefited from Reynolds International's weakness. Some of my advisors even suggested that we consider entering the market aggressively while Sophia was distracted. I refused. That's not how I want to build my company. One advisor looked surprised. This is business. I know. Then why walk away from an opportunity? I thought about it. Because winning by watching someone fall isn't the kind of success I'm interested in. Instead, I contacted a neutral industry consultant. I didn't tell Sophia directly. I simply provided information about a restructuring strategy that might protect Reynolds International from accepting the unfair deal. The consultant presented the recommendation independently. Sophia followed it. Within weeks, the situation began stabilizing. The investors stopped threatening to withdraw. The board reached an agreement. The acquisition was restructured under better terms. Sophia's company survived. A few days later, I received a message. Can we talk? I knew immediately who it was. We met at a quiet restaurant. Sophia arrived first. She looked tired, but calmer than she had been during the crisis. Thank you, she said. You don't have to thank me. We didn't have to help. I know. Then why did you? I looked at her. Because our marriage ended. That doesn't mean I want you to fail. She remained silent for several seconds. Then she smiled faintly. You're different from the man who married me. I shook my head. No. She raised an eyebrow. You finally understand your worth. I smiled. Maybe. She looked down at her coffee. I used to think you were too dependent on me. I know. I was wrong. I know that too. She laughed quietly. You're not going to make this easy for me, are you? I smiled. You don't need me to make it easy. That answer seemed to stay with her. After that meeting, we returned to our separate lives. Sophia's company recovered. My company continued expanding. Neither of us tried to interfere with the other. For the first time, our relationship existed without contracts, expectations, or unfinished arguments. Then, unexpectedly, Sophia contacted me again. She wanted to meet on the anniversary of the day we had signed our marriage agreement. I almost refused. Then I changed my mind. We returned to the restaurant where we had signed the original contract. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe the restaurant hadn't changed. Maybe I had. Sophia was already waiting. 2 cups of coffee sat on the table. She smiled when I approached. Thank you for coming. I was curious. About what? Why you wanted to meet? She looked at the coffee. I used to think that day saved my career. I sat across from her. And now? She took a slow breath. Now I think it changed my life. I didn't interrupt. She continued. I didn't love you when we married. I know. I didn't understand what you were giving me. I know. I thought leaving you would be easy. I smiled slightly. It wasn't for me. Her expression softened. I'm sorry. This time, I believed her completely. Not because the past had changed. It hadn't. But because she no longer seemed to be asking for anything in return. That made the apology different. She looked at me. Do you regret marrying me? I thought about the question. No. She seemed surprised. Not even after everything. I regret that we couldn't become what I hoped we would become. I paused. But I don't regret what I learned. What did you learn? That love shouldn't require you to abandon yourself. Sophia nodded. Then she asked the question I expected. Do you regret leaving? I answered immediately. No. She looked down. Not even once. I regretted the pain. I paused. But I never regretted choosing my freedom. She nodded slowly. I think I finally understand. We sat quietly for a moment. Then Sophia smiled. Could we ever become friends? I laughed softly. Maybe. She raised an eyebrow. Maybe. You'll have to earn it. She laughed. You're making me earn everything now. Like everyone else. For the first time in a long while, she smiled the way she used to before becoming consumed by her career. There was no sadness in that smile. Only acceptance. The evening ended peacefully. There was no dramatic reunion. No promise that we would start over. No attempt to recreate a marriage that had already served its purpose. We simply stood outside the restaurant and said goodbye. Take care, Daniel. You too, Sophia. Then I walked away. The city lights reflected across the pavement as I headed toward my car. I thought about the man who had entered that restaurant years earlier, believing a contract could eventually become love. He had been hopeful. He had been patient. And he had been willing to wait far too long. But that man had learned something important. Leaving didn't mean losing. Sometimes leaving was how you finally found yourself. I started my car and drove into the night. There was no anger behind me. No unfinished argument. No desire to make Sophia regret anything. Only peace. Our marriage had begun as a contract. It had ended as a lesson. And now, finally, it was simply part of the past. I had no regrets. Not because the story had ended the way I wanted, but because I had finally chosen a future that belonged entirely to me. 2 years after the contract ended, my company had become one of the fastest-growing firms in its industry. We had expanded internationally. Our team had grown from a handful of employees into several hundred professionals. I owned my own home. I had built a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. For the first time, I could look at everything around me and know that I had built it myself. Sophia remained one of the most respected CEOs in the country. But she had changed too. She learned to take vacations. She started leaving the office before midnight. She stopped treating every relationship like a negotiation. Most importantly, she began allowing herself to be vulnerable. Occasionally, we met for coffee. At first, those meetings felt strange. We had spent 2 years as husband and wife and another 2 years learning how to become strangers again. Eventually, the awkwardness disappeared. Our conversations became easier. We talked about business, books, travel, life. Sometimes we even laughed about memories from our marriage. One afternoon, Sophia looked across the table at me. "I'm proud of you." I smiled. "Thank you." She hesitated. "I used to think you left because you stopped loving me." I shook my head. I left because I finally understood that love shouldn't require me to disappear. She remained quiet. Then she nodded. "I understand now." That sentence meant more than any apology she had given me before. She finally understood that my departure hadn't been punishment. It had been survival. I hadn't walked away because I wanted Sophia to suffer. I had walked away because I couldn't continue living as someone who was always waiting to be chosen. One evening, Sophia invited me to Reynolds International's annual celebration. I almost declined. Then I accepted. The event was held in a grand ballroom filled with executives, investors, employees, and members of the press. Sophia eventually stepped onto the stage. She spoke about leadership, responsibility, trust. Then her speech took an unexpected turn. Sometimes, the greatest lesson in leadership is learning that people are not assets you can control. The room became quiet. Sophia continued. "I once believed that every important relationship needed rules, boundaries, and conditions." She smiled faintly. I was wrong. I watched from my table. She wasn't mentioning me. She didn't need to. I knew exactly what she meant. The audience applauded. Sophia stepped away from the microphone. Later, she found me near the balcony. "Thank you for coming." "Congratulations." She smiled. "Did you like the speech?" It was honest. That was the point. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked directly at me. "I don't want another contract." I laughed. "Good. I don't want another arrangement." "Even better." She took a breath. "I want to know whether we can begin again without either of us owing the other anything." I looked at her carefully. For years, I had imagined hearing those words. There had been a time when I would have accepted immediately, but I wasn't that man anymore. I had learned that wanting someone wasn't the same as needing them. So I didn't rush. I simply asked, "Why now?" Sophia answered honestly, "Because I finally understand what I lost." I remained silent. She continued, "When we were married, I thought you would always be there." She looked down. "I treated your patience like a guarantee." I nodded. "That was the problem." "I know." She looked back at me. "I don't expect you to forget what happened." "I'm not going to." "I don't expect you to trust me immediately." "Good." She smiled. "But I want the chance to earn it." I considered her words. Then I smiled. "Then we start with honesty." Sophia nodded. "Honesty. No contracts. No contracts. No financial arrangements." "Agreed." No pretending everything is fine when it isn't. She smiled. Agreed. I looked at her. Then we can start. Her expression softened. She reached for my hand. This time, there was no legal agreement, no financial arrangement, no deadline, no condition, just a choice. The contract had once brought us together. Leaving without regret had taught me how to stand on my own. And now, Sophia was finally asking to stand beside me rather than above me. That difference mattered. I looked at her and remembered the man I had once been. He had waited for his wife to notice him. He had accepted forgotten dinners, missed birthdays, silent evenings. He had convinced himself that patience would eventually be rewarded. But love wasn't supposed to be a reward for endurance. It was supposed to be mutual, chosen freely. I wasn't that man anymore. I had built a company, a home, a future, a life, and I had done it without waiting for Sophia to decide whether I was worth choosing. Perhaps that was why her choice finally meant something. She wasn't choosing me because she needed a husband. She wasn't choosing me because a contract required it. She wasn't choosing me because her career depended on it. She was choosing me because she wanted me. Freely. I looked at Sophia. Are you sure? She smiled. For the first time, completely. I laughed softly. Then let's take it slowly. I can do that. We stood together on the balcony as the celebration continued behind us. There were no cameras focused on us. No contract waiting to be signed. No deadline hanging over our heads. Only two people who had once lost each other because they didn't understand what they had. And now, perhaps, we had a chance to discover whether something real could grow from the lessons of the past. I had spent years waiting for Sophia to choose me. Eventually, I stopped waiting. I chose myself instead. And somehow, after I stopped needing her choice, she finally became ready to give it. That was the strange truth about our story. Love couldn't be negotiated. It couldn't be purchased. It couldn't be forced. It could only be chosen. Freely. Every day. And this time, if Sophia and I continued forward, neither of us would be trapped by a contract. We would stay because we wanted to. Together.